Please welcome Politico's Executive Vice President, Jonathan Greenberger.
Good morning. Good morning. To those folks in the back, come sit down. Come sit down. We got plenty of space for you up here. We got a great crowd this morning here at the CNN-POLITICO Grill in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We made it to day 3 of the RNC. I think that deserves a round of applause to being on day 3 of the RNC. Huge thanks to our great partners at CNN who have put this incredible space together with us. Huge thanks to all of you out watching the live stream on social media or on our website, politico.com. Thanks to everybody in the room. And thanks to our partners at the National Association of Realtors for working with us to present a really great morning of programming to all of you today. As you know, we have some great mayors joining us this morning. We have Dr. Ben Carson, who will be by in a little bit, Governor Sarah Sanders, and a little bit later in the day, stick around for Congressman Richard Hudson, the chair of the NRCC. So with that, looking forward to the day. Thanks for being here.
Please welcome Politico's financial services editor and co-author of Morning Money, Zach Warmbrodt, Milwaukee Mayor Cavalier Johnson, New York Representative Mike Lawler, and Miami Mayor Francis Xavier Suarez.
I was going to ask you about that. Jerry the King. Yeah, I was. I'm a big fan. So that's great.
All right. Good morning. Thanks for joining us here. So I'm going to lead a discussion this morning on housing challenges in the U.S. and how the second Trump administration might address those. And as you all know very well, housing affordability and accessibility are two of the biggest economic pressures facing Americans right now. And it's a really big struggle for policymakers at all levels of government to address. And so what we want to dig into today is what are the expectations for a second Trump administration potentially addressing this problem. We want to go through some of the ideas in the GOP policy platform that address housing and get a sense of how those might be going over with members of Congress and also local officials. But first, we want to start with some news of the day. I want to start with former President Trump's selection of J.D. Vance as his running mate. My colleague Jonathan Martin has a column up this morning about how GOP security hawks are scared to death about the selection of J.D. Vance. And I wanted to start with you, Congressman Lawler. You're on House Foreign Affairs. You've supported Ukraine aid, and J.D. Vance has been one of the staunchest critics of assistance to Ukraine. So how concerned are you about the potential foreign policy of a second Trump administration given that?
Not concerned at all. If you look at foreign policy under President Biden, it's a disaster. Starting with the withdrawal in Afghanistan that resulted in the death of 13 U.S. service members, to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, to the terrorist attack on Israel, to the threats emanating in the Indo-Pacific from China. President Trump, under his administration, took on China, took on Iran, and took on Russia. And the reality is, if you look at what is happening in the world right now, you have this unholy alliance between China, Russia, and Iran that seeks to undermine the United States and destabilize the free world. Since Joe Biden took office, Iranian petroleum sales are up over $100 billion. $100 billion increase. Those funds are used to fund Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and other terrorist organizations in the region. 93% of Hamas's budget comes from Iran. That's why it was so important in the supplemental aid package to get my bill, the SHIP Act, and the Iran-China Energy Sanctions Act in it. So I believe President Trump is going to have a very strong foreign policy, as he did during his first administration, to combat this malign influence. Now, there's no question within the Republican Party, there are some that have a more isolationist view. I do not. I recognize America's role in the world and the responsibility as leader of the free world. to combat this malign effort by these countries to increase sanctions on Iran and China and Russia, and to support our allies. It's why I fought to get the supplemental aid package through. There will obviously be robust debate and discussion, and no, America cannot be the world's police officer, but the reality is that we have to continue to forge coalitions. We have to continue to get NATO to invest, and that, frankly, is something that President Trump was extremely successful at, forcing NATO countries to pony up. I also think we need to be building a NATO-like alliance in the Indo-Pacific, which is a bill that I introduced, to bring Japan, Korea, Taiwan, the Philippines, Vietnam, Australia, New Zealand, and India. India is going to be key going forward as well. So I expect a very robust foreign policy in a second Trump administration.
But are you picking up your fellow Republicans are scared to death also?
No. Look, I know when we're get into these things and somebody gets chosen, there's always the urge to try and say, well, this person's going to do this or do that. The foreign policy is going to be dictated by Donald Trump. Obviously, Senator Vance is going to have a seat at the table in this. We'll see who becomes Secretary of State, who becomes UN ambassador, who becomes Defense Secretary, who becomes CIA director. That will all play into this. And look, in the Republican Party, we have a big tent. We have a lot of perspectives and views, and they should be heard. But as a member of Foreign Affairs Committee, I can tell you, by and large, the Congress is united in supporting Israel, supporting Ukraine, supporting Taiwan, and combating our adversaries.
And Mayor Suarez, there's an economic component to what J.D. Vance brings to the table too. I mean, he's an economic populist, takes a much more skeptical approach to corporate power, has a different view on taxes than the president does. I mean, do you see any potential downsides or concerns there?
No, I actually see a huge upside. I think the upside is when you get to know his story. I'm sure there are many people that have downloaded his book or watched his Netflix movie in just the last 24 hours, myself being one of them. And it's actually promising. And I think, I'm very influenced by Melania Trump's letter when she talks about humanizing people. We have dehumanized each other. We have categorized each other. And by doing that, we've been able to attack each other and do it in a way that we think is defensible to ourselves and our own moral code. And I think now you're going to see someone who came from poverty, who understands issues like the one we're going to be talking about today, which is affordable housing, and how inflation plays a part in affordable housing, how rising interest rates play a part in affordable housing, how technology, he's a tech investor, how technology plays a part in affordable housing from the perspective of zoning codes and also building faster, right? And having artificial intelligence devices and programs that help local governments like ours approve projects faster. Getting an affordable housing project done has a multitude of components. Funding is not the only one, right? It's one, and it's obviously a super important one. And it's important that we leverage it, which includes interest rates in that formula. But the other part is what kind of technology allows us to do it faster. And I think a vice president like J.D. Vance will be able to help in federal policy that will help us get money faster, deploy money faster, and do it more efficiently. And that's exciting for me.
So that's a bullish take. And Mayor Johnson, I wanted to run a similar question by you. I mean, just given that it looks like President Biden, former President Trump are pretty close in Wisconsin, according to the polls. Do you have any concerns about J.D. Vance moving the needle there for Donald Trump? I mean, the Trump campaign's talking about his appeal for working class voters and younger voters. So are you concerned at all?
Well, I think that a couple of things. I think that with the announcement of Senator Vance to be former President Trump's running mate, they're banking on his Midwestern roots to tip the scales in states like Wisconsin here or Pennsylvania or Michigan. What I think we're missing is the fact that he already had a vice president who was from the Midwest, and that didn't turn out too well in 2020 because obviously Joe Biden won the election. I don't know if I'm too concerned right now about the senators ability to influence young people. Certainly he is a youthful man, 39 years old, and that for somebody who is 37 years old shows me that I got some catching up to do. But I don't know if here, at least in Wisconsin, if we speak to the perspective here and in our state, if that really moves the needle. I think what he's most known for here in Milwaukee and in Wisconsin are his comments relative to the former president some years ago, calling him, cultural heroin and things of that nature. We don't need to go into all that right now, but I think those are the things that Senator Vance is known for, mostly right here in Wisconsin.
Got it. And I wanted to stick with you for one more News of the Day question. I mean, if you read Playbook this morning, we had a story about some polling that showed that a number of other Democrats would perform better than President Biden in several battleground states. And I know you've been a staunch supporter of the president, but where is your head at now when you see polling like that? And are you rethinking that position at all?
I am not rethinking that position at all. Joe Biden went through a primary process where anybody could have challenged him. They chose not to. He cleared the field. He got millions and millions of votes. He's got enough delegates. He is the presumptive Democratic nominee. He will be our nominee. I'm a delegate to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago next month. I'm going there to proudly cast my vote for Joe Biden, and I predict that he'll win Milwaukee, he'll win Wisconsin, and ultimately he'll win re-election to continue serving as president of the United States. I'll say about my fellow Democrats, I mean, you can have a food fight about all this. It doesn't change the fact that Joe Biden's going to be the nominee. I think some of those Democrats should just knock it off, for crying out loud.
And one more question, kind of tying it back into our housing issue because it's related, but is there anything the Democrats should be doing differently to appeal to disaffected voters, like people who just feel like they're being left out of the economy?
Sure, and I think things are being done right now under President Biden's administration. I mean, I think about my experience working directly with President Joe Biden and his administration right here in Milwaukee. So many positive things have been done that have affected people who may feel disconnected from the entire process. When you think about the bipartisan infrastructure law, in Milwaukee right now, there are a ton of projects happening directly related to funding from that bill that's having a positive impact on the lives of people here. I mean, when the pandemic happened, we endured a scourge of reckless driving behavior, and I know that other cities around the country have as well. Well, we're able to attack that with infrastructure upgrades because of the bipartisan infrastructure law. You think about other things like the American Rescue Plan Act. Cities large and small across the United States were able to benefit. Here in this city specifically, like we were on a course where we were going to be insolvent financially as a city. And the only reason why we had the runway for myself, our county executive, David Crowley, other leaders to go to Madison, our state capital, and strike a bipartisan deal with Republicans in the legislature and our Democratic governor, Tony Evers, to provide additional revenues for the city is because President Joe Biden provided those funds in the American Rescue Plan Act. If that didn't happen in Milwaukee right now, we would have lost half of our police force, literally. We would have lost a quarter of our fire department. Hundreds of other city employees who deliver services each and every single day would have been out of work. Our library system would have crumbled. But all of that did not happen because of our partnership with President Joe Biden.
Well, thank you all for indulging my non-housing questions. And so let's dig into housing policy, which I'm really excited about. And Congressman Lawler, so you're on the House Financial Services Committee. It has jurisdiction over housing and HUD, the Federal Housing Finance Administration, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. And I've covered that committee very closely in the Senate Banking Committee for more than a decade. And you hear every Congress, both sides of the aisle, housing is so important. We're hearing that housing is unaffordable, it's out of reach, and I don't know if I could tell you what Congress has done to address that problem, despite that real bipartisan fervor there. From your perspective, why is that not happening?
Look, during the first 2 years of the Biden administration, Maxine Waters served as chair of Financial Services. And I think they had over 60 hearings on housing. And they passed 0 bills on it. And you look at housing as an issue. I believe it's one of the most fundamental issues we need to deal with as a country. You look at immigration and the border. You look at energy policy. You look at, obviously, taxes, spending, regulations. But housing is critical. We're 6.5 million units underbuilt nationwide. My state of New York has a real housing crisis. You have 50,000 vacant units in New York City right now, in part because of the policies that have been put in place in New York. Rent control and the rent laws that were put in place in New York have created a nightmare. Because if you're a landlord or a property owner and you're told arbitrarily that we're going to cap rents here, but taxes go up, utility costs go up, and then you're told you have to bring the apartment up to standard, well, you know what you're going to do? You're not going to do it. You're going to leave it vacant and you're going to take the tax write-off. And that's what's happening in New York. Over 50,000 vacant units. So when President Biden comes out last week to try and appease the progressive left and says, we're going to cap rent nationwide, that's the biggest load of bullshit I've ever heard. It doesn't work. You have to incentivize, okay? You have to incentivize construction, new construction. You have to incentivize landlords and property owners. Subsidies alone are not going to solve this problem. And so to me, I look at this, Republicans really have not had a housing plan since Jack Kemp. And Democrats' housing plan is to just throw more money at it. That either way, doesn't work. So I'm actually in process of coming up with a very robust housing plan that I'm going to be introducing in the coming weeks that really looks to tackle this issue. The National Association of Realtors put out a report showing that the average mortgage cost in Rockland and Westchester counties, where I represent, just north of New York City, home to the Clintons and George Soros, the average mortgage cost is up $1,000 a month. So over $12,000 a year more in mortgage costs because of interest rates, because of insurance costs, because of taxes. This is unsustainable. So you have a crisis in terms of supply. You have a crisis in terms of cost. You have a challenge across the board where young people, I'm 37 as well, young people cannot afford, by the way, I have a better beard than J.D. Vance, but you cannot afford to buy a home. Okay, so the rental market is getting squeezed as well, and the cost within the rental market is going up. So you have to incentivize from the federal government to build the supply, okay? You can't just arbitrarily cap rents. That does not work. And we see the consequence of that in New York.
I mean, just quickly, any kind of like bullet points on what might be in your bill? Can we get some news out of you today? What you're going to propose?
We are in process of drafting final language. So I'm not going to get too far ahead of it, but I will tell you it is multifaceted and covers a broad swath, including dealing with homelessness, dealing with affordable housing, dealing with insurance, interest, mortgage interest rates, how we combat all of this, and ultimately how we incentivize development. Because if you're not building new housing stock, okay, we're not fixing the problem. And the other part of this is, look, I live in the suburbs. My district is almost entirely suburban. There's only one city, the city of Peekskill, which the way it is structured and developed is more like a village. It's more like a small downtown business district than it is a major urban center. So multifamily housing, while an element to this, is not necessarily going to work in certain areas. And my district, I have the New York City watershed. A lot of areas in my district are on septic and well. You need to invest in infrastructure. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Act actually was one of Joe Biden's great accomplishments, and I would have supported it had I been a member at the time, because you need to build roads, bridges, culverts, sewer, water infrastructure to incentivize the development of housing.
And one last question for you before I turn to the mayors for the local view. What is your expectation for housing policy in a second Trump term? Any thoughts, expectations, insights onto what a second Trump term would do to address affordability and accessibility?
Look, I think the biggest issue facing the country is affordability. Okay, the average cost of groceries, gas, home heating, housing has gone up astronomically under Joe Biden. People cannot afford to live in areas like mine, the state of New York. New York leads the nation in outmigration in large part because of the disastrous policies that have been put in place economically, chasing jobs and businesses out. So I think President Trump's approach is going to be focused on a number of factors. Number one, obviously, reducing government spending, bringing down inflation, tax reform, which also will help in terms of incentivizing new construction. In addition to that, obviously, you need energy reform. We need to increase domestic production of energy. If you want to bring down the cost of construction, you need a strong energy policy. When you ban natural gas, when you ban new natural gas hookups and require everything to be electric, guess what that does? That jacks up the cost of construction and the cost of home ownership. That limits the ability of people to get into the housing market. So we have to be smart about what we're doing. And like I said, I'm putting forth a robust housing plan that I will take to the administration and say, this has to be a priority. 6.5 million units underbuilt. We need housing in this country, and housing is economic development. It's good paying jobs for our construction industry, and obviously it gets people into safety, it gets them out of poverty and homelessness, and it's critically important to the overall economy.
And housing is one of those economic problems where really a lot of influence is held at the state and local level, obviously. So, I mean, Mayor Suarez, I mean, what has worked in your community to address these challenges, and that maybe President Trump could adopt?
And I would add that it not only is fundamental to the human person, right, in terms of their safety and security, but it has all kinds of downward benefits. For example, in the city of Miami, we leveraged every dollar that we received, public dollar, to the tune of 20 to 1. Now, under a high interest rate environment, that leverage goes down. So you're not able to build as much in the aggregate as you would under a low interest rate environment. So that's how interest rates affects, for example, rental housing supply stock. We've seen, and I don't know all the specific statistics for Milwaukee, but I would venture to guess that rental prices are up double digits in Milwaukee. They certainly are up significantly in Miami, and I was president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and as I crisscrossed the country, they were up all over the place. So I think finding leverage, getting to a place where we can continue to leverage our dollars is significant because you can build more. The product that's being built is significantly better than what was being built generation ago, because it's a public-private partnership and it's being managed by the private sector, but it's managed at small margins. So interest rates also matter in how you finance those projects. If rates get out of whack, what happens? The project's not financeable, and so you can't build stock. And so you sort of a circular problem, right? You stay at that $6.5 million that the congressman articulated. But what we see with these developments is that there are ancillary benefits that I think should be incorporated from a cost structure. What do I mean by that? In Miami, last year we had the lowest per capita homicide rate in history. Right, 31 homicides last year. 1980 we had 220, so 85% reduction from our high. But I think part of that, a big part of that, is affordable housing. We've built thousands of units of affordable housing, and people live in dignity. They have gyms inside these affordable housing multifamily complexes. They have, they have community centers. They have places where they can congregate, have meetings, et cetera. And so rather than being in places where they're vulnerable, they're in places where they're safe, and we've seen a massive delta. Also, unemployment is at a record low, which, again, this is all ecosystem building. So I think, for me, what we saw under the prior HUD director, Ben Carson, was we also saw an investment in workforce housing. We haven't really talked about workforce housing. And so you're talking about what they would say, they would define it as 80% of area median income to 120 or 140% of area median income. That's your nurses, that's your police officers, that's your firefighters, that's your teachers being able to work and live in the urban core, right? And I think that is important because these people are propelling your ecosystem. So I like to see the Trump administration build on that, what Secretary Carson did in financing, doing HUD loans to workforce housing projects. They did one in Miami that we're really proud of. So I think there's a lot of policy that can be enacted. But I do think that we talk about the problem, but we often do not think about the symptom, right? Inflation, overspending, interest rates, right? These are all correlated. They're all tied together. So if you don't get those things under control, it almost is irrelevant as to how you can do things at the macro level, right? To really move the needle and try to get millions of units built. But then the last piece, I would just go back to something I said earlier, which is technology, right? Building takes time. It can take 2 years, it can take 3 years, depending on the efficiency of our government's approval process and a variety of other factors. But we should be working together, federal government, state governments, and local governments, on making it faster and making it more efficient.
Thanks. And Mayor Johnson, it came up earlier as the Biden administration proposal to cap rent increases. I think it's effectively using tax credits. It's effectively a 5% annual increase on what you can do, a cap. What do you think about that idea?
Well, I think you have to do both, right? And I think the representative was alluding to this. Like, you can't just simply have a cap there, especially as it relates to rent. But to me, in the experience that we've had here in Milwaukee, you got to do both, right? You got to have a cap like that, because here in this city, what we've seen is that there are corporate out-of-state landlords who gobble up a number of properties that otherwise would go to first-time home buyers, particularly African Americans, Latinos, who then are blocked out of being able to go into the housing market for themselves and for their family, and they gouge the prices. So what Mayor Suarez mentioned, yeah, we are seeing rent prices raise in Milwaukee. I think Milwaukee was like second in the country in terms of rents that were going up. A big part of that is because of these out-of-state corporate landlords who never even stepped foot here, but gobbled up a bunch of properties and then jacked up the rents in neighborhoods where people already couldn't afford them. So one of the things that we've been doing in our community is working with local nonprofit organizations to break up that chain of these corporate landlords, trying to buy those properties back and get them back into the mix so that people in our community then have access to those properties. That's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is, yes, and the representative alluded to this as well, and across the country, millions and millions of properties that we have to build just to keep up with the housing supply that's needed and the affordable housing supply that's needed. That's something that we need to embark on as well. And that's what I think the president has talked about, what he wants to do in his next term as well, is building more housing supply for people, not just in Milwaukee, but across the country. We're looking at using our tools at the local level to address that very same issue. I've got a very robust update to our zoning code that hasn't really been updated in roughly 20 years. We keep mayors for a long time in Milwaukee, so that's like 2 mayors ago in Milwaukee mayor terms. So we're doing a robust update to allow more housing by right and encourage developers to have more development in neighborhoods, including more affordable housing and workforce housing as well.
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. I really could have kept going for another half hour here or more. But thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. And I think the big takeaway for me, and hopefully for the audience, is that it does seem like we're at an interesting moment here for the federal government, federal policy, kind of like a new frontier here, and maybe Republicans wanting to rethink how they approach housing. Thank you very much. And please subscribe to Morning Money. And stay tuned to Politico. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Nice work, sir.
How are you? Oh, yeah, it's nice to see you.
Please welcome White House Correspondent's Playbook co-author and new White House Correspondents Association President Eugene Daniels and former United States Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Dr. Ben Carson.
Hello, hello, everyone. How are you? Are we still in the morning time? Yeah, we're just making it. Nice to see all of you here. Dr. Carson, Secretary Carson, do you prefer one or the other?
Whatever.
They're both great.
Just don't call me a cab.
Yeah, exactly. I won't do that. Thank you for coming. I want to start in our 20 minutes that we have here talking about the tragedy on Saturday at President Trump's rally. Have you had a chance to speak with President Trump? And also, what was your initial reaction to hearing that he'd been shot?
Yes, I've talked to him. And obviously, like everybody else, I was shocked. Not horribly surprised.
Why not?
Because I've been saying for a while, there's so much hatred directed toward this man, it's only a matter of time before somebody tries to assassinate him. You know, it's so important that we begin to tamp down the hatred and actually just talk about the issues. Wouldn't that be refreshing?
It'd be new. It'd be
we could
new.
do that. But I also believe that there was divine intervention there. You go back and you look at the Battle of Monongahela during the French and Indian War. George Washington was a courier for General Braddock. And he had 2 horses shot from underneath him. All the other couriers were killed. He had 4 bullet holes in his overcoat and bullet fragments in his hair, but no wounds. And you know, it was years later one of the Indian chiefs was on his deathbed, and Washington was going to be in the area still before he was to become president. And he told his men, "Take me to see him." And when he saw him, he said, "Sir, I am an expert marksman, and I shot you many times. And my men shot you many times. Pretty soon I tell them to stop shooting you. They're just wasting their bullets." But he said, "I wanted to meet the man who was protected by the Great Spirit of God." That used to be in our history book until it became politically incorrect.
When you spoke to President Trump, what did he say?
He was just very grateful to be alive, because I've been telling him for a long time that he was divinely appointed to help us get our country back.
The shooting comes in increasing political violence over the last few years. Representative Steve Scalise, who was here with my colleague Rachel Bade yesterday, the wife of the former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Paul Pelosi, victims of this type of violence, similar types of violence. How concerned are you that this is going to continue and it's going to be a part of our political process now?
Well, I think it's going to be worse if we continue down the road of demonizing each other. If we can just get to a point where we understand that, yes, there are differences in people's political philosophies, but that doesn't make us enemies. And somehow we've gone from love your neighbor to cancel your neighbor if they don't agree with you, or if they have a different yard sign. And that divides us as a nation, and you see all kinds of attempts to divide us on the basis of race, age, income, gender, religion, political affiliation, you name it, divide us. And Jesus said it best. He said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." And Abraham Lincoln echoed that. And we're reaching a stage in our country now that is similar to what was going on at the time of the Civil War. And we really need to dial it back. And we're not each other's enemies. And you know, if 2 people agree about everything, one of them isn't necessary. We just need to stop, dial it back, learn how to talk to each other, learn how to put the facts in the middle of the table, and have your discussion of differences based on the facts and not on ideology.
You keep saying we, and I assume you mean the
We the
royal
people.
we the people. And, you know, you've talked about Democrats and kind of their vilifying, in your words, of President Trump and how much you said they hate President Trump.
I didn't say Democrats. I just said they.
People, they. But you know, we've seen that on the right as well, right? President Trump is kind of known for his own incendiary. You worked with him, right? His own incendiary.
Yeah, no one can say that this is all one side or the other side, but one can say that we all need to engage in dialing it back.
So what responsibility do people like former President Trump have to tone it down for the right? You guys can only work on and kind of fix your own house, and Democrats will have to do it themselves. I guess, what should President Trump be doing right now?
Well, I was pleased to hear that his speech was being rewritten for tomorrow night to take a more conciliatory tone, a more inclusive tone, and that needs to be done by everybody. It particularly needs to be done, and I'm not picking on you, but it needs to be done by the media. Because remember, the press is the only business protected by our Constitution. And it's because they're supposed to disseminate unbiased information to the populace so that the country can be run on the will of the people. But how can it be run on the will of the people when the people who are disseminating the information are putting their thumb on the scale? So I'm hoping that young journalists such as yourself.
Thank you for calling me young. I appreciate it.
Will recognize the tremendous responsibility to be truthful and not to buy into ideological preferences.
Yeah, I want to push back a little bit on the media question, right?
Okay.
Because often, there are problems within the media because we are all over the place, just like Republicans are all over the place in different parts of the country and different ideologies. That's the same thing with the media, right? There's no capital M media, and we are often a reflection of what we are told, like yourself, what we hear from the conversations, especially for us at Politico, behind closed doors. Though we're not making these conversations up, right? The fights that are happening ideologically and now physically in this country are real. And, it seems it would be incumbent upon leaders like yourself and former President Trump and the folks speaking on stage to lead everyone that way. Because if you guys, not you in particular, not to pick on you as you said, but the leaders of this country changed their tone, that would reflect itself in the media because we are just a reflection of what we are told and hear.
Well, now let me push back a little bit.
Let's do it.
Because what I have noticed is a tremendous uniformity, particularly in mainstream media. A story comes out, boom, they're all saying exactly the same thing, even using the same language. You think that's a coincidence?
Well, there's background calls that we all get on. Some of these things happen all together at the same time. There's no cabal of editors across, because trust me, the competitors are not hanging out, getting together and having these kinds of conversations.
Yeah, but most of the people don't disagree with each other. They all sort of go in the same direction. And it's really very ideological. If people who watch Fox and Newsmax exclusively have different philosophies from people who watch CNN and MSNBC regularly, there's a lot of things that some people don't even know about.
Agreed.
And that's not right. You should really be able to talk about everything in an objective way. And it's a journey. I think we're hopefully in the process of making the right turns in that journey so that we get to the right place. Because the end result of continued divisiveness, if you know world history, it's not good.
We could have this media conversation all day, but these folks probably want to hear some more, so I'll move on here. On the vice presidential selection, J.D. Vance, I'll keep it pretty simple. What'd you think?
I think J.D. is a very smart individual who has a wide range of experiences, from the depths of poverty to being a millionaire. And I think it gives him the ability to relate to a large portion of the population. And I'm hopeful that he will use this opportunity to particularly appeal to the young generation.
Yeah, he would be the first millennial vice president.
Yes, and to help them to really begin to analyze things based on facts and throw the ideological stuff out of the window. We just don't need that. We need facts.
he has made something that a lot of folks who used to be either never Trumpers or Trump critics, the journey from calling him in a text message to a former roommate America's Hitler, saying he was noxious, reprehensible, to now being the vice presidential pick. That's quite the shift. I guess, where do you think this switch up came from?
Well, I think he was willing to actually observe. You know, a lot of people hate Donald Trump. And when you ask them, why do you hate him? They can't really articulate why they hate him.
I can send you some that can't articulate it very well, just if you need it.
I'm sure you can, but I said a lot of people, because they just buy into this is an evil person. But there are others, very much like JD, who say, wow, this man actually got control of the border. This man actually made us energy independent. You know, this man has helped our economy, made opportunities for lots of people, did such things as made funding for HBCUs regular so that you don't have to come with a hat in hand every year. You know, those are pretty amazing things. This is a man who brought some respect back on the world stage. And if you look at the objective components of what he did, it's pretty good.
But I also think, you know, objectively, part of the reasons why people have issues with President Trump also have to deal with the way that he speaks about others, the kinds of things that he says. You talk about facts quite a bit. This is a president who, you know, has a tenuous relationship with the truth at times,
Sure.
right?
But let me ask you a question.
Of course.
If you were very ill and you needed a complex operation to save your life, would you rather have the surgeon who has a terrible bedside manner but saves everybody, or the one who has sweet words and kills everybody?
It's a good, they like that one. They like that one. I assume we'll be hearing that some more from you, sir. You know, it was reported that you were on the list for vice president. What can you tell us about how that process went?
I know very little about it.
No. You were vetted. Did you have to send in any vetting documents?
I'm sure there was some exchange of information, but remember, they already know me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so there's not a whole lot of vetting that needs to be done in that case.
You've been vetted, you say. After the attempted assassination of former President Trump, Vance said that the rhetoric from the Biden campaign directly led to the shooting. And you know, you're talking about changing the language. Do you agree with his assessment? Is that helpful to what you're saying needs to happen in this country?
I think it would be very helpful if all sides backed off of talking about individuals.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you can't say something good, don't say anything at all, because it poisons the atmosphere. And when you stop and you think about it, what good does it do? Does it really make the world a better place?
Have you had this conversation with President Trump?
I've talked about a lot of things with him.
Is this one of them?
And one of the things that he frequently says is, yep, you're right about that. And
but he hasn't really changed his tenor and tone.
I think him, along with a lot of people on the other side, almost have like a knee-jerk response. When somebody says something about them, they have to respond.
Like kids on the playground.
And
jump back at them.
And I used to be like that, so I understand it. And the thing that changed me was my relationship with God. And I realized that the reason I got angry and I wanted to lash out at people is because it was about me. Me, mine, I, somebody did this to me, I want this, you know. And if you can step outside of the center of the circle and let it be about other people, you're very unlikely to react that way.
So many of the former presidents, the officials that worked for him, have refused to support him publicly this time around. Who knows how they're going to vote in November? You're one of the few speaking at the convention. We saw former Ambassador Nikki Haley last night. You've stuck by him this entire time. Why?
Because, you know, the reason that I entered the political arena in the first place, because I would have never thought that I would end up in the political arena years ago.
That's what every politician says.
No, I just wouldn't. But thinking about children
Yeah.
and grandchildren and the kind of environment that they're going to grow up in, I decided that I couldn't relax and just sit by and enjoy the fruits of all my labor and not worry about anybody else. And that's why I did it.
But why are there so many others who aren't supporting him this time around? Your colleagues, the people that sat around that cabinet table with you.
Because I think they haven't really done the analysis. They haven't thought about if they were that patient who needed that operation. They just thought about, how do I feel about this?
I think General John Kelly has probably done some of the calculations in his head.
Maybe.
Bill Barr.
Maybe, and maybe not. But you know, this applies to everybody. Democrats, Republicans, all of us. And it applies not to just Donald Trump, it applies to everybody who uses inflammatory language. We all need to just stop and think about, are we friends and neighbors and colleagues and co-workers, or are we deadly enemies? Which one are we? We need to make that decision. We need to make it soon, because the things that happen to nations that go down this pathway are not good. And just because we're the United States of America doesn't mean that we're immune from the kinds of things that destroy other nations.
But the concerns they have aren't just, about how they feel about how President Trump talks or how they talk about President Trump. Right? It's sometimes on policies, on especially for those who worked with him on the foreign policy side. A lot. That's where their concerns are about how he speaks and acts on the world stage. So it doesn't feel like it's just their non-warm.
Well, I haven't heard them articulate any significant policy differences. I've heard them articulate personality issues.
I want to get into black voters, because it's rare you have a black reporter with a former black secretary, a black former secretary. You are still black, it seems.
Well, not according to Biden, I'm not.
Well, I'm gonna leave that one alone. I'm nonpartisan here at Politico. Why does it seem to you that there, in the polling we're seeing and in some of the reporting that we're seeing, that there are so many black men who are at least interested, who seem interested in Donald Trump, if not excited to vote for him?
I think it's because they realize that his philosophy is a rising tide.
Which philosophy?
Trump. Okay. A rising tide lifts all boats. And he has enacted policies that lifted their boats, that made their lives better. And he doesn't sort of pick and choose this group versus that group and say, well, this group had the advantage that time, so now let's give this group the advantage. Forget about all that, and let's just do things that help everybody. I think that's attractive, particularly to people who in the past have perhaps experienced some unfairness.
What are the policies that he has that, are specifically tailored to, black people, right? You think about, there are a lot of different issues that affect all people, but they impact black people more. There's that saying in the black community, when America gets a cold, black people get the flu.
Right.
So what are those specific policies that he has ready for a second Trump administration?
Things like sealing our border, because you have a lot of people who are coming in who are taking a lot of the non-skilled jobs. Well, unfortunately, we haven't reached a point in our society yet.
But black people don't just work in non-skilled jobs.
Well,
we're both in very skilled jobs.
Let me finish what I'm saying.
Okay, you're right.
Unfortunately, we haven't reached a point yet where where black people are evenly distributed throughout the job market. You still have a disproportionate number who benefit from those low-skilled jobs. We need to keep working on that. But in the meantime, those are the people who are disproportionately hurt when you have people coming in and taking those jobs. And you've probably noticed that the unemployment rate for blacks has gone up about 1.5 since the Biden administration took over.
It's down currently.
People feel that. No, don't believe that.
Don't believe it. Okay.
Go look at the real numbers. And
Where are you getting your numbers?
from economists. This is easy to find. This is
Yeah.
not difficult information to
Yeah,
find.
no, I know.
But even put the numbers aside, just think about it logically. If you have a bunch of people who benefit largely from low-skilled jobs, and then you take another group of people who benefit from those and you put them into the same pool, guess what? Those original groups are not going to find jobs as easily. So you don't even have to put numbers into it. You just think logically, and you can see that that would be the case.
So the border, his immigration policies, what other policies?
Educational policies, where you push education for reading, writing, arithmetic, basic things that you need, over ideology. So as you've seen, we have people now who are pushing things like, what is your gender, what is your pronoun, bringing, transgender people into schools and
But they've been in
exposing
schools.
kids like that. Those are kinds of things that make a difference. If parents want to expose their children to that, fine. But when schools do that, I'll go even further than that. I'll say if the school is teaching the kids everything they need to know, and they're all stellar students, and they still have a lot of time left over, okay, then you can teach them all that stuff. But let's not substitute the things that are essential for people to know for things that are not.
We only have a couple minutes left here, and I want to get into housing. It's something that the American people are feeling. We just had the mayors here and the congressmen here talking about housing policy. President Biden just released a housing policy that would call for stripping a tax benefit from landlords who increase their tenants' rent more than 5% per year. It only applied to landlords who own more than 50 units, or larger landlords. Is this a policy that you think would help with the housing crisis that we have, the rental crisis that we have?
Well, rather than complicating the situation, I would take it the other direction. Let's uncomplicate the situation. Let's get rid of a lot of the regulatory barriers that drive the prices up so high. That's why in California, you recently saw where they built a big multi-family thing for the homeless at $600,000 per unit. Why is it $600,000 per unit? Is the technology such that we have all pearl handles on the faucets? No, that's not why. The reason is because you have regulation after regulation, some of them duplicating things, and that takes something that maybe cost $150,000 to $200,000 to $300,000 to $400,000 to $500,000 to $600,000. When I was secretary, those units were about $400,000. It keeps going up because we keep adding regulations. And we had actually hatched a pretty good plan for Los Angeles for the homeless there. I was working with Mayor Garcetti, with Governor Newsom, with several of the county execs, and several government agencies, by using government land and by actually addressing the real problems of the homeless, because 40 to 60%, depending on which numbers you use, are either drug addicted or mentally ill. And just taking them off the street and putting them in a place like Housing First, and don't get me wrong, I like Housing First, but you got to do Housing Second and Housing Third. Housing Second, you diagnose why they were on that condition, and Housing Third, you fix it. If you don't do that, 90+% of them end up back on the street. So, we were taking all of that into consideration. And then guess what happened? COVID. Everything was off the table.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that we can't work.
Get back to it.
Yeah, we need to work together.
I'm probably going to get some eyes here from my producer Parker soon, but before I let you go, if President Trump were to win and he asked you, would you serve in the cabinet again?
You know, I'm open to lots of different things. My real goal is to make sure that we save our country for everybody, and particularly for the young people who are coming after us.
Would you want to help save the country in the cabinet for President Trump?
I would want to help save the country in lots of different ways, and we will see. We will see which way the Lord leads.
If the Lord led you to the cabinet, would you want to be in HUD again?
I will always do what the Lord wants me to do.
Exactly. I think the Lord might lead you to the cabinet. So I'm going to say, would you want to do HUD again, or is there another department that you'd be interested in? You talked about education quite a bit just now.
Well, as you may or may not know, currently I'm heading up the American Cornerstone Institute, which focuses on the cornerstone principles that made us into a great nation: faith, liberty, community, and life. And we have a Little Patriots program which is spreading like wildfire, teaching the young people what the principles of our country are and what our history is: the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we don't shy away from any of the bad stuff that happened. But the fact of the matter is, there's a heck of a lot more good than there is bad and ugly. We just have to teach it the right way. So,
Secretary of the Department of Good.
I'm going to continue that work, or I want to continue that work. So, we'll look at all these things, but one thing I can guarantee you is that I'm going to continue to work very hard to move our country in the right direction.
Secretary Carson, thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Gene and Dr. Carson, Dr. Secretary. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. We ask you to stick around and be patient through our next executive conversation, which will be followed immediately with Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who had quite a speech last night. We're excited to have that conversation with Jonathan Martin here. And also later this afternoon, we will have with Ryan Lizza, our Playbook author and deep dive host, a conversation with Representative Hudson, chair of the NRCC, talking about the House races, right? Someone reminded me, when a new president comes in 2 years later, not such good chances for the House, so there might be a good conversation there as well. Without further ado, we'll bring on our next panel. Thank you for joining us all day long.
Please welcome Politico's Vice President of Client Partnerships, Heidi Sommer, the Real Estate Roundtable's President and CEO, Jeff D. DeBoer, and National Association of Realtors Chief Advocacy Officer, Shannon McGahn.
All right. Hi. Hello. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for being here. I am thrilled to be here today with our partner, thanks to the National Association of Realtors for their partnership on today's program. NAR is America's largest trade association, representing residential and commercial real estate for more than 1.5 million members. With me today is Shannon McGahn, Chief Advocacy Officer for NAR. Shannon, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Heidi.
I'm also thrilled to be joined by Jeff DeBoer, the President and CEO of Real Estate Roundtable, an organization made up of leaders who serve as public policy advocates for the commercial real estate industry. Jeff, thank you so much for being here today. So we are talking about housing today. This is a huge topic. This election has already been a tumultuous cycle, to say the least, and we're only in July. There's a lot going on in housing, and we know that the president just this week announced a significant rent cap proposal. There are a lot of other big initiatives that voters are thinking about this year as it relates to the housing and real estate industry. So I'd love to start with both of you setting the scene a bit and giving us a sense from your perspective on what are some of the most pressing challenges that we need to be tackling first as we go through this year and think about the future. Jeff, maybe I'll start with you.
Let's start with Shannon.
Oh, thank you.
Do that. Okay, well, thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jeff.
Ladies
first, Heidi, thank you, and thank you, Politico, for helping to lead this conversation about housing. And just as you said, it is something that we're talking about today, but Americans are talking about every single day. recent polling has showed that a vast majority of both Republican and Democratic voters are worried about housing affordability and what that means for their families and for their ability to get into a home. And that's not just on the home buying side, but that is for renters as well. So what we see is that President Biden and his administration have been focused on housing affordability. I think the latest proposal is something that they're asking Congress to do. It is not likely to be something to move soon, and we think it's misguided. That these types of rent control efforts will have a chilling effect on development for more housing, and that is the #1 problem that is making housing so unaffordable, is that there is not enough supply to meet the increasing demand. That inventory and high inflation, high interest rates, and to add another I word into it, insurance has become increasingly unaffordable. And so these are all areas that we're working in a bipartisan way with the administration and with Congress to make sure that there are policy solutions that will actually help more people get into homes that they can afford.
If I could double down on that, the rent control idea is a very bad idea. It's never worked. It's been, wage and price controls have been put in place during wartime. It hasn't worked then. It's not going to work now. It's going to discourage development and investment, and it's going to lock people in. And it's just a bad idea. How's that?
You got it. We agree. Did you see our press release?
Absolutely.
But the Biden administration has been helpful on some housing policies. For example, they want to help convert obsolete buildings into housing, and the low-income housing tax credit, and some other ideas that have been carried around.
So as we think about policy, Jeff, a question I have for you is looking at tax reform. That's a major issue that the real estate industry is thinking about. We know that into 2025, we have some expirations from the 2017 tax cut coming up. What do you think those changes are going to look like? And I will also say, how do you think that tide changes depending on who's in power in the White House and Congress after the election?
Yeah, well, first of all, I didn't get to thank you for having us and Shannon for inviting me to do this, and it's great. I'm very honored, and I'm here representing 18 organizations, not just the Real Estate Roundtable, so I wanted to get that out. The tax cut bill of 2017, we were very successful, but that wasn't because we got tax cuts. We preserved tax laws that we'd worked on for decades to make sure that the industry was taxed on an economic basis. So there's a couple that relate to real estate directly, the pass-through entity provision, low-income housing tax credit. But a lot of these other issues were maintained in 2017, capital gain, carried interest, the 1031-like kind of exchange provisions and things like that. So we want to preserve those. And it's going to be a struggle, I think, as all of this in the whole tax code comes up. So we've got our work cut out for us. As far as which administration, on the margin, you can argue one issue or the other, but a lot of these things are going to come up regardless. Housing is a big issue. It doesn't matter who's in charge. We're going to be talking about housing. We're going to be talking about cities and commercial real estate and what's happening with office buildings and so forth. So these things, they're going to come up, and we're going to have to defend them like we always do, with facts and good analysis.
Something you both already have touched on is the tremendous housing shortage that we're facing. And we have, congressional testimony earlier this year from NAR. This number was staggering to me as we were getting ready for this conversation, that in 2023, the annual number of existing home sales was the lowest recorded since 1995. So Shannon, can you speak a bit more to the urgency here in addressing the shortage that we're facing?
Well, sure. And I think that, so looking at the shortage is also inventory across the country. And we put out a landmark report several years ago that shows we were about 5.5 million units short of a healthy housing economy. And that number has only gone up because you could not have supply meeting the demand right now. So that lack of inventory is something that can be tackled through creation of new housing, but also existing housing where folks may have an investment property, or they may have a retirement property or a second home that they're not using, and that we have had proposals on a bipartisan basis that say, here are tax incentives that can help unleash that existing inventory, and you could get millions of units on the market immediately. And I think it's also important to note, to Jeff's point, that as we look at the expiration of several provisions of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, I had the honor of working at the Treasury Department during TCJA back in 2017, and seeing so many friendly faces here throughout the convention who were part of it then and part of what that solution looks like going into 2025. If you look at what realtors are talking about and what consumers are talking about and and what is even in the GOP platform is where are those tax incentives that can be done in a bipartisan way to help encourage that investment. We have bills like the YIMBY Act that passed with unanimous bipartisan support. Everything that we have been advocating for, it's all available on flyin.realtor is our website. We keep all of our talking points and policy priorities fresh and up to date. But every single piece of legislation is something that can come out of a Ways and Means Committee with a Republican or Democratic chairman, that can go through the Senate, that can be done in a bipartisan way and won't necessarily rely on the reconciliation process, but of course could be things like the More Homes on the Market Act that I mentioned earlier, the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act, and these have been going around for years. So I think 2025 isn't just here is a turn in the road for TCJA, but here is an opportunity for how do we evaluate the current economic conditions and the current concerns about housing and address that through tax incentives.
You know, you get back to the proposal this week, that will impede new development of housing. So the problem really is supply, and a lot of it is local, whether it's long permitting or the NIMBYism and so forth. So applaud you for what you're doing on that, Shannon. Very good.
So Jeff, I want to pick up with you a little bit more on this concept Shannon was talking about there are a lot of bipartisan opportunities here. And a recent study from the University of Michigan cited that an equal 70% of Democrats, Republicans, Independents all alike named housing affordability as their top concern. What do you feel is standing in the way of what actually feels like a fairly bipartisan issue? What's standing in our way of actually solving it then?
Well, Shannon hit on it. The supply is way down, 5 million, I think you said on single family, probably 3 million short on the multifamily side. There's just been a lack of production over the last 10 or 12 years on both sides for a variety of reasons. Some, supply chain, inflation on costs, labor shortages, other things, but a lot of it really is permitting, zoning, NIMBYism, issues like that would encourage housing, and it is a bipartisan issue. Look, you have to have housing everywhere, right? So we're looking forward to working with the Realtors and all of our coalition on issues to spur the supply side of housing, which will help on the affordability side of things.
Well, and to Jeff's point, I think it's also important to note that these are not all federal issues, that these are issues that we're facing at the state and local level, a lot of that in zoning restrictions and reforms. And what has been interesting about that bipartisan figure that you mentioned is that you actually see that happening throughout state legislatures as well. So you'll have states that are solidly blue states creating the same type of housing policies or similar ones as solidly red states, because you're seeing that this is something that's impacting every community. It's not just San Francisco is expensive, New York is expensive. You're seeing that all communities are more expensive and every locality has to address it. We partnered with many of the mortgage bankers and many other real estate organizations with the Housing Supply Accelerator and how we can have a playbook. We put together, the American Planning Association has a playbook to go directly to mayors and to state legislatures and others on here are policies that have been working across the country that can be implemented. And that's an important conversation to have with all of our localities too.
You talk about policies that work. One, if you want an example of a policy that works, the low-income housing tax credit is a program that actually works. And it could be made better, it could be expanded, made more robust, but it does work and it helps provide the housing and it helps provide opportunities for people.
So Jeff, I want to take us in a slightly different direction here and talk about the housing shortage being so closely connected to interest rates. What would you like to see the Fed do with interest rates leading up to and after the election?
Well, let me step away from housing for a second and just talk about real estate in general. All assets, whether it's hotels, office buildings, industrial plants, data centers, all of the forms of commercial real estate, which is valued around $17 trillion, about the same size as the New York Stock Exchange, oddly enough. Long-term people in the real estate business wanted interest rates to be steadily rising over the last few years. A lot of people felt that they were artificially low for too long, that created too many problems. So, when I say that we want interest rates to be cut, it's not just that we want them cut, we want them normalized to what is the true rate of inflation. We think that they overstate inflation because of the way that they measure the rent within the inflation calculator. So we want the rates to come down, but not just to come down. We want them to be normalized with true inflation. And it is a, commercial real estate and housing. It also has been hit with the triple whammy. You had costs going up. You had insurance costs going up. You had demand changing coming out of the pandemic. And then you had, values dropping and the back to home working and not working in the office, which has caused a perfect storm for a lot of assets. So all of this goes together, and solving one isn't going to be a panacea to the other. It all goes together, and it impacts jobs, it impacts cities, small businesses. So that's what we're going to be working on. Shannon?
Well, and the Fed, their own research shows that the typical homeowner has 40 times the net wealth as someone who is renting, and there is room in the entire real estate economy for those who choose to rent, but many would like to be able to buy a home and are just finding it unaffordable with the rising interest rates and inflation and just the post-COVID economy and the huge demand. But one of the other areas that we've seen is that people were concerned that millennial homeowners were just not coming into the market. Well, they did, and they came in very strong, and that has created that demand, while you see many older Americans who are trying to downsize. So creating an area where you can, they call it the missing middle, where you can find middle income housing that is available, and that is not, you're not going to go and be against 30 other people to try to get to that one house. That's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath ranch kind of thing. And that's what our members are seeing throughout the country. With 1.5 million members, 90% of them are independent contractors, small business owners who are working every single day with consumers and hearing what they're looking for in this real estate economy. And I think that's exactly what all of our elected officials are hearing too.
Do you see existing homeowners locked in because they don't want to get out of they've got a low interest rate on their mortgage?
A low interest rate, and if you have investment properties or others, you have a big capital gains hit if you sell that home. So you see many are giving to family members, and they're not putting it on the market, and that's what we're looking for legislation to address.
So something that Shannon and I was really surprised by is just the staggering impact of what we're talking about, that the real estate industry and sector makes up 1/5 of the nation's economy. That really puts us in a much broader perspective. So from your POV, what is at stake if policymakers don't act, and what is the role of the industry in this?
And I think that's why, because it is such a large sector of the economy, and it does impact every single person, every single zip code, that you're saying that it is such a bipartisan issue. So unlike many other industries where we are always working with Republicans, Democrats, anyone who is seeking a solution to help with these housing policies. So I think that impact is we're seeing more politicians who are willing to come to the table and say, this is what I'm hearing. Florida has passed massive bipartisan legislation that addresses workforce housing. And how do you ensure that teachers and firefighters and first responders are able to actually live in the communities where they work, and creating the housing that's needed there? And you're seeing those types of policies travel around the country because what works is going to spread. And so that's where we come to play. And our members are in every zip code too, and we work at all levels of government to help educate and get these policies through.
Real estate's the only asset they're not making any more of. It's a joke, you can take that one. But it's very broad, as you said. 15 million people work directly in real estate. About $1 trillion of pension plans and 401ks are invested in real estate. About 60 to 70% of local budgets that pay for the teachers and the firemen and the roads and stuff comes from commercial real estate transactions and property tax payments. So when we sneeze, a lot of other businesses get a big cold. And Shannon's right. We work with everybody to try and get that point across. We have to have strong real estate values and growing real estate values. And we need an educated workforce. We need all of the other things. So I've gone on too much.
So we're running low on time, but I do want to close with, on an optimistic note. I always love to end these conversations sort of with a forward-looking, positive tone. So what are you both seeing that's giving you hope as we go forward? We've talked about a lot of bipartisan momentum. There's a lot of work that your organizations have been doing. But for each of you, what is giving you hope for the future, that these are issues that we can solve going into and after this election?
Well, how do you think it's these types of conversations and the fact that we're putting a spotlight, not just Politico and the organizations represented here, and but the American people are, that we're seeing this discussed more in every day in the newspapers, on TV, that this is housing affordability is a problem, and it will take work at all three levels of government in a bipartisan way to get it done. And talking about it and discussing those solutions are the first steps to real action.
Yeah, and I think there's a misunderstanding about how we work. You know, we're up there trying to educate and inform people. I think you talked about the tax code. I think there's only like maybe 5 members on the Ways and Means Committee, current committee, that were there in 2017. Mm-hmm. So you have to go back and educate and constantly talk about the connectivity. And we're optimistic on all of this because these are good issues. The tax side, we think we're economically based. Housing, we need to improve those things. We're connected to cities, so all we have to do is make the case and get up there and talk to them. And look at Shannon. Who wouldn't say yes? I mean, go ahead.
It's easy as that.
Well, we will definitely keep these conversations going. Jeff, Shannon, thank you both so much for joining me today. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Please welcome Politico's senior political columnist and politics bureau chief, Jonathan Martin, and Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
Hey, how are you? Well, hey, everybody. Grab a seat if you don't have one. Looking at you, Kevin Yoder, the pride of Johnson County. All right. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. And Governor, thanks for joining us today. Full disclosure, the governor and I have known each other since we were both, I think, in our 20s. Met when her dad was governor of Arkansas and exploring a run for president. And some of us have done something with our lives since then.
I'd like to think both of us.
So I want to start with last night, because you gave a pretty spicy speech out there last night. There's a little bit of your dad out there, right? Which is the kind of fun, was smiling, but a little bit of a blade there too. So tell me who came up with a line about your son and Jill Biden?
You'll be
What's the backstory
proud,
there?
You will be proud to know that was a collaborative effort with, you nailed it, my dad.
There you go.
So I have the distinct privilege of having a dad who is a masterful communicator. I'm also married to somebody who is brilliant in messaging and strategy, and so certainly a great team effort. I have a great team on the ground as well, and work together. But for me, and ultimately, I wanted it to be something that was personal, and I felt like it was important to tell my story and no one else's. And so that's what I went out there to do, was talk about my experience and what I got to see firsthand, and communicate that in a way that was both authentic to me, but also helpful for other people to get to see a side of the president that you don't always see.
Let's stay on that topic, because obviously you did serve in the White House in the first first term of the former president, and you know him pretty well. What's a interesting, fun, compelling, or revealing story about President Trump that maybe folks in this room haven't heard before, that you think sort of tells us something about what he's actually like behind the scenes?
You know, one of the things that I feel like the president sometimes gets credit for, but usually not, is that he has one of the best senses of humor of any person you will ever encounter. He's truly fun to be around, and you certainly see, I think, a lot of that in his speech style, is that he has this larger than life personality, but he likes to have a good time. He works really hard, but his sense of humor comes out in his day-to-day, certainly interactions. And I got to experience that a lot, and some stories I will tell in a setting like this, and some I won't. Certainly one of my favorites, and I'll try to make this the short version. I had the chance to travel with the president pretty extensively, both domestically, and I went on every foreign policy trip that the president took during my 2.5 years. And that's where I think you really get to know people when you've been on the road doing long days, as you know, for 20 hours at a time over a 7-day stretch away from all of the normal of life. And he was getting ready for probably one of the most historic, monumental days of his presidency, certainly up until that moment when he was getting ready to meet with Kim Jong-un in Singapore. You have two world leaders. The rhetoric had been pretty intense back and forth leading up to this moment. And, you know, anytime you're talking about nuclear war, things get pretty serious pretty fast. And so the level of intensity was very high. You had the entire world watching, waiting to see how this was going to unfold. Many people cheering for failure, many people just tuning in because they wanted to see what would happen. But literally everyone was watching to see what would take place on the world stage. And we're getting ready to walk in. I was one of a handful of people that were going to represent the U.S. delegation on our side, and our North Korean counterparts would be on the other side. So we're literally going into a room with the world's most brutal dictator and his team that has been charged with carrying out some of these pretty awful orders.
Right.
And I'm looking up and down the row, and you've got Mike Pompeo, John Kelly, John Bolton, a couple of guys that are experts in North Korean and Asian affairs, and me. And it was very clear very quickly who the one that stuck out was. And so I think, you know what, for my own personal benefit, I'm going to lighten the mood a little bit and see if I can loosen things up, mostly to put myself at ease. And I turned to Mike Pompeo and I said, hey, Mike, am I the only person here who either hasn't killed someone or hasn't ordered someone to be killed? He looks at me, he looks at the room, he goes, yes, Sarah, you're the only one. I told him, I said, I saw that going a little differently. And so that sets the stage for this meeting. So I'm already pretty nervous and terrified of what's going to go down. And I'm sitting just on one side of John Kelly, the president, in the middle. And I'm taking notes and just trying to capture the moment. And we're working through a translator. And at one point, I look up as I've caught up with the translator, and I make direct eye contact with Kim Jong-un. And he gives me this kind of like little nod and a wink. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've just been marked for death. So I immediately take my chair and move it over to John Kelly, and I'm getting as close to him as possible without making a big scene, thinking if things go down,
the Marine.
I want to be next to the 4-star Marine general.
Right.
So like I'm moving over, and he's kind of giving me a look like, hey, can you settle down, whatever's happening over there, please make it stop. And so the day goes on, and it's a huge success, and they have this great first meeting. The president does a press conference about an hour and a half, totally on message, like we're on cloud nine, like things are going well. And the president comes off the stage, he goes, hey, Sarah, you didn't do too bad today. You want to ride back with me to Air Force One? I'm like, yes, I do. This, you know, historic, monumental day. I'm living my best moment. Still terrified that I'm under watch by the North Koreans, though, and thinking it'll be much safer to be in the beast with the president. So we get in the car, and he's talking, and he's like, so what'd you think of the day? And I was like, I thought it was amazing, except for this one moment. I was pretty terrified. I think I'm on, like, the watch list. And he starts laughing hysterically. And John Kelly is laughing hysterically. And I'm thinking, I'm glad that my complete and total demise is so funny to the two of you. I was like, why are you laughing?
Right.
And he goes, Sarah, he wasn't marking you for death. I'm pretty sure he was hitting on you.
Oh boy.
And I was like, I don't think so. And, you know, in a way that only he can, he laughs and jokes around, and he goes, Sarah, your family's really going to miss you, but you get to be a hero to the entire country. You're going to love North Korea. And obviously joking, and at no point was he seriously considering sending me, I don't think, to North Korea, but just one
Trump
of those
Tower,
like,
Pyongyang.
Yes,
Yeah, exactly.
one of these like, just totally surreal day, and yet ends in a pretty light moment. And what a way to close out that day in history.
Governor, you grew up literally in the Republican Party. Arkansas was a very Democratic state when you were a kid, and you've seen the party change, and obviously working for your dad's campaign in 2008, it's really kind of the front of the wave in terms of the realignment of the party, in terms of its orientation, both voters and increasingly policy-wise. Tell me what you think has happened to your party just in your lifetime, and how do you square it with the kind of traditional, Reaganism, small government, free trade, strong military, protect force abroad? What do you think happened, and how do you live in peace today between the kind of, the Vance wing, I guess you could say, and the more traditional kind of Reaganite wing?
Well, I think that the biggest thing and the most even maybe oversimplification for me in describing the difference of the two parties, there's a lot of nuance, and you can sit and you can debate every single issue, and you'll find, Republicans that can be divided in certain places. But when you really look at kind of the driving forces of both parties, the way that I see it, and certainly the way that I govern in the state of Arkansas, and I think most Republican conservative leaders are trying to govern from whatever position they're in, is that if you want a party that believes that individuals should make decisions about how to run their business, how to engage in their community, where and how their kids should be educated, and frankly, you want the government to leave you alone for the most part, then you're a Republican. If you want the government to make those decisions and dictate the rules much more heavy-handed, then you're a Democrat. Everything else gets much more simplified when you look at it from those two lenses, but I see that to be the most clear distinction between where the two parties are now. You have one that really believes in the decision-making power of the individual, and you have one that thinks that a lot more power should be centered in the government. And for me, and the way that I'm trying to govern, that's why we focused on cutting taxes, passing universal school choice, and really trying to put power back in the hands of the people.
Now, the critique of you in Arkansas that folks...
I haven't heard any of those.
I know, it's shocking.
You're clearly reading the wrong information. So.
Exactly. I'll stop reading the Arkansas Times.
I could have told you that long ago.
So the critique of you in Arkansas is, obviously, you grew up there, you grew up literally in the mansion, but that you're more of a national-oriented figure now, and that you're kind of looking beyond the horizon of Arkansas toward a national profile. I guess my question is, do you have any interest in serving in a Trump White House in any capacity, number one? And I think the answer is no, right?
I love what I'm doing. I think I have the best job in the country, and I have 3 amazing kids that are 12, 10, and 9 that are very happy in Arkansas and to be back home. We did 2.5 years in Washington. Our family settled, and I'm very interested in serving in that capacity for the next 6.5 years.
So you want to run for re-election and serve a full second term?
I do. I've actually already announced that I'm running again, and have filed my campaign, and am full steam ahead.
26?
Yes.
Now, I think I'm right here, but my understanding is that there's going to be an open race for president in 2028.
Your math seems correct. I know you're a writer, but your math's not bad.
So a lot of people do believe that the first female president inevitably is going to be a Republican. Do you subscribe to that school? A, would it be easier for the country to elect a woman Republican, number one? And then number two, whether it's 28 or 32 or down the road, are you at all intrigued by the idea?
I certainly hope that the first female president is a Republican, and I think there's a long list of people that are capable and could certainly take that on, and I would be excited to see that happen. I want to see every president be a Republican, whether they're male or female, so I'm pretty biased in that. Right now, frankly, the only election I'm focused on is November of this year. As soon as that's over, again, I will transition into really focusing on 2026 and getting reelected as governor in my home state. I'm really proud of the things that we've been able to do. You know, there are probably some critics that say that I focus too much on national politics, but if you look at what I'm actually spending my time doing and not just the narrative that they want to drive, my time has been focused on Arkansas. I've done more than 250 events over the last year and a half in the state of Arkansas.
How many counties?
Been to all 75 counties. And I have invested and put all of my time in terms of legislative policy on things that impact everyday Arkansans. Education being first and foremost. I made no secret during the campaign that would be my top priority. And ever since then, we have spent almost every single day working not only to pass historic, transformative education legislation in my state, but now implementing it. You can pass the best legislation in the world, but if your execution is terrible, then it doesn't matter. And so we have spent a tremendous amount of time very singularly focused on making sure that the execution is done to the highest level so that the students in our state really start to achieve at the highest levels.
Come back to the challenge of women running for high office, because obviously the most prominent example is Hillary Clinton, but there have been a number of Republican women who have run for president and who have struggled. I mean, from Elizabeth Dole to Nikki Haley and folks in between. But where's your head on that? Like, why has it been so challenging for this country, which in so many ways has made enormous progress over the decades? Why haven't we yet cracked that?
I mean, to be fair, a lot more men have run and lost for president than women. So, I mean, in comparison. But I do think our country's ready. I think that there is a great desire for a female to serve in that role, and when and who that is certainly is yet to be seen, but I think our country is ready for that and would be supportive of it.
So you obviously supported the president this time around, but not immediately out of the gates. And there was some reporting about, why hasn't Governor Huckabee endorsed? She worked for the Trump administration. What was the phone call like when you talked to President Trump and said, all right, I'm coming out for you, and you planned that event? Like, was it a little awkward or tense, or how'd that go?
No, it wasn't. I have a great relationship with the president. I started working for him during the 2016 campaign and have maintained a great back and forth, and really proud to stand with him both in 16 and 20 and again.
He didn't give you a hard time at all?
And again now. I mean, I wanted to get through my first legislative session, and we spoke and planned out that event for a couple of events, or for a couple of months. And it was an amazing feeling to get to be back with a lot of the people that I had worked with in the White House, but more importantly, to support somebody that I knew could step in and lead on day one. And he has a clear and strong record of saying, here's what I'm going to do, and then going and actually getting the job done. And so for me, it wasn't a hard decision. I wanted the timing to be right, but I could not be more proud to support this president both in 16, 20, and again now. And I know he's going to win big in November, and I'm excited to help him every step of the way as he gets to the final days and takes the White House back.
This is a political junkie crowd, and this is a question for this kind of an audience, but it's widely assumed that if Trump does win, the junior senator from Arkansas, Tom Cotton, will take a position in the Trump cabinet. And we were talking a minute ago about Arkansas state law, which I think most folks here don't realize this, but the appointment process to fill that seat is a little different in Arkansas. Tell us about that.
So certainly a great possibility that Senator Cotton could take on a role in a Trump administration. He is incredibly smart, incredibly conservative, articulate, and I think there are so many different things based on both his business background, political, military service.
What's the best gig for him? If you could write it today, like, what's the best gig for Cotton?
I mean, I think he would be phenomenal in the CIA, defense. Those are places that I think he immediately steps into and can be a great voice at the table with President Trump, but ultimately that's the president's decision. He has to have a team that he's comfortable with, that he has good chemistry with. I've seen the difference when he has somebody in a role that works and doesn't, and so it's really important, and ultimately it'll come down to where he thinks someone fits best. But if that were to happen, certainly would leave a big hole in Arkansas. While we would be happy for him, sad for us, but he fills a big space on the foreign policy and national security front for our state. But the way that it works is the governor then appoints, but that person cannot run for that seat later. So it would be a max of a 2-year commitment for whoever went in to fill that spot.
Which makes it easier on you in some ways, because you don't have to choose a favorite then, because whoever you would appoint.
Oh, they still see it as picking a favorite. So I'd be happy for you to communicate that it wouldn't mean that. But, usually...
But no head start for anybody.
You make one person happy for life and a whole bunch hate you forever. So,
right.
But again, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But we love the 2 senators that we have in our home state. They are a great complement to each other, really strong leadership there, and would love the opportunity to continue serving with both of them for a long time.
You were in the White House with Trump in the first term. You saw some of those, shall we say, robust discussions on policy. What do you think it would be like if we had a Tom Cotton, who's an Uber hawk, with J.D. Vance in the sit room talking about Ukraine policy? Like, how would that go, do you think?
I think it'd be fun to be at the table.
There you go.
So,
there you go.
And that's one of the beauties, I think, of this president is that he does, despite what a lot of the critics say, he actually enjoys a really good back and forth and difference of ideas at the table. But ultimately, he's the decision maker. Yeah. He is masterful at taking in copious amounts of information, getting all of the nuances of both sides, and then being the one to ultimately make a decision. And that's what you need in an executive, and he's very good at it.
Governor, what's the biggest difference between politics today and the politics that you grew up with in the 80s and 90s?
I think the biggest difference, and I don't mean this as a negative.
I don't mean ideologically. I mean,
yeah. And so I hope it doesn't come across that way. But I think the presence of the media is very different.
How so?
One, anybody who has a cell phone now considers themselves to be a journalist, whether they are or not. And so getting good, fair, accurate information to the electorate is really challenging because there's not the same level of an editorial process.
Right.
I mean, think back to when you first started as a reporter. Before you put anything into the public space, there were probably 6 or 7 people that looked at it, checked it before it ever saw the light of day. Now, anybody with a cell phone pops out a tweet and it can drive and make and change the news cycle in a matter of seconds, whether that's a political figure, a media figure, or just somebody who happened to catch something on a camera. And so the dynamic and the level of access has changed so dramatically, and the way that the press covers and engages has changed so much, because you can't sit back and wait on 6 people to weigh in and tell you, otherwise the story's gone and it's already changed. Now, there are certainly like longer form stories that do that, but by and large, news is driven no longer in a 24-hour cycle, but it's like a 24-second cycle. And people want to be first instead of being sometimes right. And so there's a rush to put it out. And I'm not saying, again, that's a negative thing about the press. It's just the fact of where we are now, and it has changed the dynamics so drastically.
Did you ever think when you first started working in politics that you would long for the days of the mainstream media when there were responsible reporters and editors from newspapers? Come on, fess up.
I would love for us to go back to that 100%.
There you go. You heard it here. No, but like nowadays, if you want to reach the most Arkansans, right, the most straightforward way to do that is to go on Fox News. I mean,
yes, reaching most amount of
good, bad, or otherwise,
or also, frankly, using my own social media. And so now you have the ability, and I think President Trump was one of the pioneers in doing this, is he could go straight to the people and deliver the message he wanted to the people he wanted, and do so more quickly and more effectively than sitting down for an interview. Not to say that you shouldn't still do those things, and we certainly do and engage, but if you want to get something out, we have our own channels to do that. And used to, that was not an option. The only way to get a message out was to sit down and do an interview on the morning shows or the nightly news. And they have lost that punch because now people have the ability to get access directly and in a much more unfiltered way.
But the downside being in their own chosen silos. Right. And you don't have the same shared facts that you would have had 30 years ago.
And sometimes it's not their chosen silos, but big tech has helped choose those silos. videos because they push people into the places where they see what they want to see. And so it's a very large echo chamber that is not always dictated even by the person putting it out, by the people who control the algorithms and the technology.
Hey, speaking of big tech, one of the things that you did that I thought was pretty interesting was that you sent a copy of this new book that all of you have heard about, that Jonathan Haidt wrote about the role of smartphones in children. You sent that copy of that book to every governor. Why'd you do that, and what is your solution to kids and technology?
Well, and I think every state's going to be a little bit different, and hopefully this is one of the places I do think at some point the federal government may need to engage, but there's not a single
What
piece
should they do, the feds? What should they do?
Correct. And there's not hold on, I'll come to that in just a second, but there's not a single piece of data that exists that will tell you that kids having all day, every day access to smartphones and social media is a good thing. We're seeing the mental health crisis just skyrocket in this country, and a lot of it ties back to access to social media, to smartphones, the depression rates, suicide, anxiety among teens, particularly teen girls ages 12 to 17, has gone up 10 times in the last 10 years. Now, and often it's compared to cigarette smoking, and I think one of the biggest differences, certainly we learned, hey, you know what, smoking in confined spaces and smoking for kids is a bad thing, so let's tell them not to do that. We now see that social media for teens and young people is not a good thing. So we've got to start raising that awareness. One of the biggest differences of those two things is that when we really were at the height of young people smoking, we had about 20% that were engaging. Now 90% of our teens are using social media. They have access to drugs, to sex trafficking, to bullying, to isolation. So it's far bigger and more compounded than that. To Politico, which, depending on what you're reading, I don't know.
The most dangerous opiate of all,
Could go either way. But I'm a mom. My husband Brian and I, we have a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 9-year-old. So we are living this in real time. It's one of the biggest fights and challenges that we have.
Your 12-year-old wants a phone.
She does. And it's a very unpopular opinion.
She doesn't have one.
She doesn't. And that's a big fight. And we've done, the stripped down watch that allows you to text. So you're not totally on the outside, but no internet browser and all those things, which makes us very unpopular. The glares that I got from the State of the State address that I gave in Arkansas earlier this year, the nastiest looks were from the front row of my children when I talked about how we should look at engaging on this topic. And if you haven't read it yet, The Anxious Generation is a book by Jonathan Haidt, NYU professor, not political, brilliant in his ability to really break this issue down, back it up with data, and most importantly, gives a roadmap of steps that we can take that can help us start to combat this
So
issue.
What's the one big thing Congress should do on this?
I think it has to be not a heavy-handed, top-heavy approach to begin with. I think we have to change the culture before we can just demand it. And so one, I think raising awareness and helping parents understand the dangers, but I think we should start looking at restricting access to social media without parental permission. We passed it in my state of Arkansas that you can't get a new social media account under the age of 16 without parental permission. Not saying you can't have it, just saying your parents need to know about it and say that they're okay with it. I think looking for things like that, one, it helps us raise awareness, but it also helps us limit the amount. Kids right now are spending on average 5 to 6 hours a day on social media and only about 3 to 5 minutes of outdoor play. This is a terrible thing for not just our country. You're seeing it across the world. European countries are starting to do nationwide bans on cell phones. I don't think we're quite there yet, but I do think that we need to start looking at what solutions we can implement, and we're certainly doing that on a state level.
All right, 2 final questions for you, both of which I think you'll appreciate. One is former President Clinton is famous for a lot of reasons, but That can go a lot of different places.
Leave that there.
Exactly. But one of the things he's famous for in Arkansas is he likes playing mentor for Arkansas governors. Yeah. He has an apartment above his library in downtown Little Rock, and he, in both parties for decades now, has really tried to sort of tutor new governors. Tell us about your meeting with him after you became governor and the conversation you had. Did he have advice for you? And if so, what was that?
You know, he and I have shared a couple phone calls since I became governor and had some great exchanges. I mentioned him and praised him in a speech that I gave on the day that I took office for his role in, as president, he and my dad opened the doors to Little Rock Central High on the 40th anniversary, where I was a high school student at the time. Certainly one of the more memorable moments of my childhood, to stand on the steps of my high school 40 years later to the day, where those same stairs and streets had been crowded with protest and the National Guard had been called in so that these 9 black students could enter the building. To that moment, you have the President of the United States, the governor, and the mayor opening the door, and those 9 students then walking in to praise and applause. Pretty monumental moment, certainly for a 15-year-old sophomore in high school. And I had the chance to talk about that. He called, and we had a good exchange, reminiscing over that day and talking about the job and the role that I was taking on. And he told me to enjoy it. He said, it's a great job. You're going to love it. It's a great state, and take time to enjoy the big moments and the small moments, and have a good time with what you're doing. And, you know, offered to be available. I also have a dad who was governor for 11 years, so a really good phone a friend for advice. And he always tells me it's worth what I pay for it. But I'm very blessed to have some great people like my dad that give good advice, pretty good speech material, and very good free babysitting for our kids.
There you go. And last thing for you, the big news in Arkansas the last few months has, with all respect to you, Governor, not been about anything to do with politics. It's been about the hiring of John Calipari as the Arkansas basketball coach. I know that you met with him when he came to Fayetteville. Did he promise that he was going to deliver a national title, or at least a Final Four for the Hogs? Speaking of Bill Clinton, bringing back the Clinton era, 40 minutes of hell dynasty.
Yeah, I mean, we don't like to necessarily give credit to him for the basketball championships of the 90s, but certainly Coach Cal has brought tremendous amount of excitement to our state. We're gearing up for what we hope will be a great football season. Look forward to hosting LSU, mostly beating LSU. Still one of the more traumatic time periods of my life was attending a night game in Death Valley with my dad, and the LSU fans
you were sober, that was the problem.
Just a little rowdy. And I was with my Baptist preacher father, and so I was
You're having Diet Coke.
Certainly not on par with 99% of the crowd there, and Arkansas won. And my dad turns to me, and they were going to do a trophy presentation on the field with my dad and the governor of Louisiana, and my dad goes, as soon as it is over, we are running out of here. I was like, I don't think it's that big a deal. He goes, trust me, we are getting out of here as quickly as possible. And he wasn't wrong. I mean, they're yelling, they're booing, they're throwing stuff. It was probably one of the most aggressive crowds, and I feel like I've been up against crowds.
That's called Saturday in Baton Rouge.
Yeah.
That's like,
they were not happy to see us, and so we got out of there pretty fast. But looking forward to a great season, both in football and basketball, and beating LSU, welcoming Texas into the SEC officially, who we also play at home this year.
Yeah.
So when I was getting ready to go to college, my dad, was very supportive of whatever I wanted to do, as long as, and he set me down and had this, you could tell he had really thought about it. He said, Sarah, we'll help you with whatever you want to do, wherever you decide to go, as long as it's not Texas or LSU. And to this day, I don't know how serious he was, but he had raised me in such a way that neither one of those were on my radar.
It was never an option. Woo pig suey.
Yeah,
on that note, Governor Sarah Sanders.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks, guys.
You.
Good to see you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Just a quick program announcement. We're going to take a break until 2:30. Return here 2:30 for Congressman Hudson with Ryan Lizza, our Playbook lead author and podcaster, from the deep dive to talk about the rest of the House races. So, thank you very much.
Have a good undershot, Lily.